All right, welcome to Evidence-Based Audio Engineering and Education. And this is number 140. Sheesh. And this is 7 is the correct number. All right, so first of all, why aren't I in school? I don't know. I'm at the school right now. First of all, I don't know how many of you guys out there, maybe everybody, I've been getting a little notification anyway, Windows users, getting a little notification in your notification area that, let's see if this one's doing it. Okay, this computer's not doing it, but my laptop certainly is. It says, your computer is ready to install Windows 11. And it's right in the thing that you normally click automatically to install an update. And, I know there's a lot of talk going around the forums about, there's always fear when there's a new operating system coming out. Look at what Apple does every time they do another version and obsolete more stuff. But Windows, man, it's a little bit more rare, so it's a lot more drastic, I think. So, you get paranoid about these updates. And it just would be so easy to accidentally click that Windows 11 and end up just completely tanking your OS, but who knows? Could work well. I haven't really heard much about whether it's working well, whether it's not, what compatibility's like. So, I just want to let you guys know to be on the lookout for that little thing on your restart your computer icon. Don't just click it. Make sure you're looking at it unless you want to accidentally get Windows 11. So, next thing, I installed the new X-Air 18, the Behringer X-Air 18, which will probably be the same for the Midas MR 18 or whatever. Digital mixer drivers for the audio interface that comes on board on those. It's said that the newest drivers expose 4 stereo pairs to Windows in WDM. They work fine under ASIO, but we had a lot of trouble with these drivers that they only showed one stereo device, just 1 and 2. But since it's an 18 input thing, there should really be 18 devices or 9 stereo devices. And this newer one's supposed to add 4 stereo devices now. So hopefully that's right, but I didn't have time to set it to really test it because some of you guys out there know it was a very hectic night last night. I didn't really get a chance to really put it. I'll see what I can do this week during the week sometime. Hopefully that works. I just didn't get a chance to check it. Okay. So True Believer stuff today. Let's see. This is from Safe Space. Somebody asked, hello, recently I recorded vocals through a tube preamp from a retro tape recorder using the dynamic microphone that came with it. The sound is warm and dense, but after I applied the software equalizer just a few decibels, the sound immediately lost its warmth and became kind of dry. Why? Are software equalizers spoiling your tube sound? How many millions of different fallacies and buzzwords are in this one? The tube sound and is a software that breaks something rather than hardware, even if they're both software, but one's running on a computer and one's running on hardware. People didn't really have trouble running through digital equalizers at the mastering lab, back in the day. I like these answers, though. It's because the EQ wasn't done with an SSL console. VST EQs can't match analog EQs. And you don't know if this is sarcasm or if this is another one. We got a good answer from the Thrill Factor. Question, are software EQs spoiling your tube sound? Answer, no. Yep, perfectly. And another smart answer, Psycho Monkey, and this is the correct answer. Maybe you took out the bits you liked or put in the bits you didn't. Somebody else, there's a little button on your plugin named bypass. Hit that and your problems are solved. I love hardware, still mix on an SSL console, but nowadays if you cannot make a plugin EQ sound good on a well-recorded... this is spelling incorrect, so let me say it again. But nowadays, if you cannot make a plugin EQ sound good on a well-recorded source, the problem is not the plugin. And like they say, right, the nut behind the wheel. Your software equalizer, I mean, there are problems. We've shown before, aliasing, cramping, phase issues. But I mean, a lot of this has to do with any EQ. But you can bypass it. You should be able to run through it transparently. If you can't do that, then yeah, something's wrong. But whatever you could do with the hardware EQ, you should be able to do with the software EQ. Minus the non-linearity kind of stuff. When you have a problem like this on a forum or Facebook group or whatever, if you can post an example, it's really good. This is almost like when you're asking somebody for evidence of something, and they just keep babbling about something else. They just keep changing the subject or moving the goalposts or whatever. Get the actual audio so you can hear what the problem is, the before and the after, and then it makes it so much easier. But they asked for it, they didn't get it, but they're still going on. I did not try to mix. I just lowered one equalizer strip by 1 to 2 dB. Should this change the sound a lot? Can you hear the difference by lowering any frequency by 1 to 2 dB? So did he turn the whole EQ down 1 to 2 dB or frequency 1 to 2? But yes, that's gonna sound a lot different. Remember the old trick of turning up the speakers you want to get rid of the tiniest bit more than the other one, even though it sounds like they're about the same? That's it's going to sound drastically different with a couple decibels difference. Less so with one specific frequency than the whole thing, but still yet. I mean, if it's like mid-range and it's a speech, of course, it's going to sound way different. Okay. Anyhow, so, this is, so many weasel words and then a bad epistemology here, right? Just post what you had in original and post what it's done to it, and let's see what we can talk about. But at least he's asking. So Reaper's just turned. So Reaper 6.40 just came out, and it's called Fully Fungible. A lot of little things here. I don't usually watch this too much, but I'm looking at Reverb. It says add convolve mode to channel tool. Channel tool supports forcing the total channel count of impulse responses. Support setting channel offset directly when adding an IR file item. Support drag drop of impulse into the plugin. There's a lot of changes in here. It's really nice to see that stuff's happening with Reverb, right? So that's pretty cool. Now I was looking at under the one near the end. It says VST3 fix MIDI data pass through. Now I'm not exactly sure what this is. I've got to ask Justin. Hopefully I can hear back from him in a little bit. But with VST3 plugins in general, have you ever noticed that a lot of your VST instruments and stuff, or a lot of the MIDI type plugins that you use in VST, you don't see them in a VST3 version, and you still see them in VST2. And if you're wondering why that is, there's some weird problems with VST3 and MIDI, and I'm wondering if this has to do with it, and if so, this is really going to be good news for our coders. We shall see. Okay, next thing. Oh, speaking of Reaper, if you ever want to, Justin Frankel actually has a channel on YouTube, and he posts his Super 8. I I don't know if you ever seen like videos of Justin using Reaper as a looper, and early on the videos would show a lot of that kind of stuff. But now he's in it's a kind of a one-man band thing where he shows, looping and just really cool stuff you can do with Reaper that probably isn't what a lot of you guys actually think that the developers of Reaper were really thinking about. But in this one, Justin has finally come to the dark side, and I see him with the 7-string guitar in his hand. So congratulations, Justin. One of us. Oh, that's awesome. So go check out on YouTube Justin Frankel, and this newest one is called Super 8 with the 7-string, October 25th, 2021. Okay, and let's see. I saw, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Stevie T had a video where he was playing a game, and the lyrics that came out, it's like some kind of Rockstar emulation game. I'm not sure if it was for real or whatever, but the lyrics that came out were actually kind of decent. And I was wondering, is there really lyric writing software out there? You would think maybe the stuff is getting there. But there is something called Master Writer. And then please choose one of the following songwriters. So I'm going to songwriter. It seems to, help with like thesaurus stuff, and it's got a dictionary, rhymes, phrases, word families, synonyms. Looks like it's pretty handy for finding words and stuff. And then there's one called Lyric Studio, and it gives you like phrase suggestions. I'm not sure if the other one does this, but wow. I never really finished songs because I was just too embarrassed of lyrics. You want to write something good, but then it's like you got to live with those words for forever. I guess I always was kind of like pre-internet. I was worried about the permanence of lyrics. So it would be cool to have some kind of tool like this, I think. Okay. We talk a lot about routing. I just got a question this morning. Somebody wanted to do some karaoke with YouTube, but he wanted to use his ASIO drivers. How do you do that? And this has been a problem since there's been audio on the computers, is moving audio between apps, between programs. And it's just pain. It's been like 22 years of this. Some of this is a little bit easier on an Apple. Some of it's a little easier on Windows. It just sucks on both of them. With my setup, I use a RME that has loopback drivers in it, and it's just such a pain. But some of you know about NDI, which was a way of getting, I guess it's some kind of broadcast standard or something, but how we knew of it was that it allows you to send Skype back and forth to OBS, the open broadcast software. Now, these guys have made something called NDI Tools now, and they have something NDI Audio Direct, and says bring audio in out of any digital audio workstation that supports Steinberg VST3 plugins. So now you can go to OBS or any other NDI app via a plugin. That's pretty cool. It doesn't solve the problem that we really want to solve, but it certainly gives an option for us, or certainly solves the problem if you're on NDI, because that is killer. So go check it out, ndi.tv/tools, and this is called NDI Direct. And they show you a little bit about how it works and stuff. This is awesome. But we've been asking app manufacturers since forever, just get your ASIO drivers in there, or get VST support or whatever, or there's so many ways this could be fixed. It's just such a pain. Anyhow. Okay. And there's a cool set of exchanges at the gear page. I want to talk a little bit about this. So the original post. So my 2015 Core i5 at 2.3 gigahertz ThinkPad, 8 gigabyte RAM, 256 SSD, Focusrite 2i2, 1 terabyte SSD setup is giving me latency, clipping, crashing issues when I try to run projects in Reaper with even a moderate number of plugins, regardless of my buffer size, energy settings, etc. And I'm planning on getting Omnisphere 2 soon, and I want to be able to run several instances of it, plus as many plugins as I want, so I don't see any way to avoid getting a new computer given these objectives. Now I'm keeping the laptop for work. Mostly records guitar and vocals, so he doesn't have a high input count that he needs to worry about. It doesn't seem. Don't care about graphics, monitor resolution, weight. He's also asking, is there any shortcomings or advantages to having a laptop versus a desktop? Which, of course, most people just say get the desktop if you can, and they're probably right. But what he's asking here, latency, clipping, crashing issues. And so I wrote him, somebody actually pinged me. That's how I heard about this thread. Where was it? Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so I answered him. I said that computer, and I know I always say this, but it's true. So that computer sounds miles more powerful than computers I mixed dozens of albums on. I have a feeling that problems right now are coming from suboptimal drivers. I should have said suboptimal drivers or other suboptimal software. And can you on a project that's giving you crap, go to Reaper and choose View Performance Meter and be sure these two options are selected and post a screenshot. And I'm asking him to show the performance meter in Reaper and to right-click the performance meter and make sure that display real-time RT CPU is checked and display RT longest block processing time is checked. This gives me a lot more information for diagnosing a problem if in case you're doing this. And so I put a picture up so he could see what I was talking about. And I said, all that said, I am betting that really well-made drivers can go at least one buffer size down from what you have now with no issues, assuming you aren't having these problems with an RME or something. And of course, like an idiot, I hadn't completely read the OP, and I didn't see that he was talking about Focusrite 2i2. Not sure if it's first or second generation or whatever. But he posted back. He says, thanks for looking, Focusrite 2i2. I've experimented with moving Reaper and its file paths plugins between my half-empty internal SSD and my external SSD, and the only difference seems to be a slightly faster load times on the external, but it didn't really help with the latency, clipping, crashing stuff. I don't know how relevant any of that is, but again, I'm worried about the words like latency, clipping, and crashing. I don't know. We'll say stuff like that, and then it might be referring to something else. Clipping is just distortion. So if it's really clipping, that's not this kind of stuff. That's just him with levels up too loud. But so he sent a screenshot and it showed some actually latent stuff. So I should make like a glossary, but maybe I'll find a way to index this. So I'm going to read this because this is kind of stuff. If you guys haven't had it all set in one place before, had everything put together, this is kind of how it is about round trip latency and stuff in your audio interfaces. Sorry. So I said there's a lot to unpack here. Refer to the image below, and I posted a picture. It didn't really help. So I'm quoting him. It didn't really help with the latency, clipping, crashing stuff. And I say, let's make 100 billion% sure that we're talking about the same thing regarding latency. Okay, sorry, 1 second. So I explained to him round trip latency, what we call RTL. This is the total time between when your sound source enters a microphone or out of a guitar or whatever until you can actually hear it come back out your headphones or speakers. In this case, we're talking about monitoring through the DAW, not through some interface DSP mixer. So not through like Total Mix or something else that bypasses the DAW. This is actually monitoring through the DAW, through your plugins, through whatever. RTL is calculated by following the signal path. The analog source first goes into the analog to digital converter, incurring a converter delay, latency from the converter. Next, it hits the audio interface's input buffer, whose sample size adds that many samples to the RTL. Next, inside the DAW, depending on how latency is dealt with, you will add as much latency to the RTL as whatever plugins you have in that path take to process. Next, you hit the audio interface's output buffers, again adding their values in samples to the RTL. But wait, there's more. It's not as bad anymore, but still, there's a whole chunk of latency people who often can't account for, which is actually the hidden safety buffers. And Jim Roseberry used to point this out to us, and this is really who really let us cued us in on what's going on. The better drivers may not need these as much, but this is why 10 years ago you had an advertised latency of 6 milliseconds with an actual round-trip latency of 23 milliseconds. Now, that's a jump and a half, right? I mean, that is terrible. You think you're getting 6 milliseconds, the drummer's yelling at you, and if you really actually measure it, you're getting 23 milliseconds round-trip latency. And we're not done yet. Before your ears can hear it, you hit the digital to analog converter and incur another converter delay. So that's what the entirety of real-time round-trip latency comes from. Now, I think he meant something else when it comes to clipping by just specifying here that clipping is entirely level dependent. Depending why it's happening, changing computers or interfaces won't do anything, very likely. And, this was the main question. If does he need a way better computer in order to run this stuff? So the round-trip latency, you can see that none of the round-trip latency is determined by your computer's power. The lowest round-trip latency you can run without it gapping, and I guess you would almost want to call it clipping, but gapping and distorting and doing all kinds of weird stuff to your audio, buffer underruns basically. That's dependent on your computer speed. The faster computer you got, the lower you can go on that, probably. I mean, and different drivers are written differently. Like the better drivers can go way lower with the same amount of CPU or whatever, or the same amount of trouble. And then when he's talking about crashing, there's so many reasons for crashings, but I see dangerous stuff in the picture. And so I say, so from your picture, and it's showing the sample rate and the buffer size and everything in the top right-hand corner, Reaper. Using the ASIO drivers, good. 256 samples with the claimed or advertised latency of 12 milliseconds. Sometimes referred to as reported latency. This is the RTL minus the converter latency and safety buffer. Usually, sometimes they actually report everything, but not in this case. Focusrite, like most manufacturers, don't let the hype pushers lie to you about this one, uses the Desicon.de drivers for their USB devices. Not RME, but pretty much the standard and USB interface drivers from Behringer to Audient. If you look at my RTL chart and my signature, that's the round-trip latency roundup that you guys, we've talked about before. The 256 sample is going to be like 13 milliseconds or something, probably fine for whatever you're doing, but 128 would be closer down to where you'd have to be a latency purist to really be bothered by it. I know, throw the tomatoes, but I'll stand by that for most things. And then I show a picture of the performance meter, and I'm circling the RT CPU and the RT longest block, and I say, so number 2, RT CPU. This is real-time CPU use, whatever. To me, things get ugly when this gets much over 25%. This value is mostly plugin dependent, and well-written plugins can spread the load so much better than that an actual 25% over a multi-core CPU is a lot of RT CPU power. The other one is RT longest block. So I'm telling you guys, make sure these two are checked. This is the big one. The number on the left is the time it took to process the longest block of DSP it did to date. Right-click to reset the graph. The number on the right is how long you have to do it in, which if you do go to a calculator or Sweetwater's handy calculator page, is the reported output buffer size of your Focusrite, 256 samples or 5.8 milliseconds. You are obviously exceeding this by quite a lot. The only reason it's not clicking and popping non-stop is very likely, almost surely, the hidden safety buffer. Usually this is entirely caused by plugins, though Reaper's extremely advanced routing can get into some CPU munch if you try and do really crazy things. The fastest computer on the market may or may not change this by much, believe it or not. And what it's showing is the RT longest block time. Okay, the RT CPU use that I was worried about was 79.5%. Like I say, I don't like to see it get more than like 25%. But a lot of people go way past that and have no problem whatsoever. But the other one that we're just talking about is the RT longest block. And his is 16.4 milliseconds and over 5.8 milliseconds. So basically, RT longest block is, as far as I can tell, how long it took, how many samples long it took to process the longest thing that it just had to process. The second number is your output buffer size, your reported output buffer size. I think the reported output buffer size. I'm not sure about that one. We'll find out. But it's definitely your output buffer size. So in this case, you have like a 6 millisecond output buffer size, or 5.8 millisecond, whatever. And the longest operation took 16 milliseconds. There's going to be a problem, right? You didn't have enough time. If you guys don't know the buffers, like let's say it's there's like this bucket here. you have a certain amount of information to put in that bucket and then move it over to the speaker bucket and the speaker plays it. If you don't fill the buckets in time, like they're just coming through its conveyor belt pretty fast. And if you can't fill them in time, you're going to have gaps in the sound. You know, does that make sense? And so if you go over that, yeah, you're going to have problems. And it isn't necessarily true. I mean, that is something that's pretty dependent on the computer power, but it's also very dependent on plugins, how they're written. Let's see. So number 3 is the reported CPU use. Okay, so I say here, you can see here the reported CPU use for each track. Notice that it sure as hell doesn't add up to the RT CPU, though it is bigger than the total CPU. The hidden CPU use is a lot of the trouble going on. That's the thing. Like, Reaper's not necessarily going to show you what's going on in your system outside Reaper, or even some things that may be going in the background of certain plugins. And if I'm seeing a really high RT CPU but a really low total CPU, I'm going to wonder about things. And I have a feeling it's really munchy plugins that are doing things in the background. Number 4, or who knows? The guy could have a network card making trouble. But anyway, here's the biggies. PDC, plugin delay compensation. Here you can see the amount of PDC for each track. PDC shows the number of samples of latency added to the rest of the project to compensate for a latent plugin. Except tracks 7 and 8, all of your tracks are using latent plugins. The master track is adding a whopping 5,273 samples of latency. This comes out to 119 milliseconds of extra latency on top of your round trip latency. I think, even me who is an apologist for higher latencies, you're going to feel 119 milliseconds. I mean, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot, man. Okay, so that would be some latency. And then I say, there are reasons for using latent plugins, like look-ahead gates and converters. But generally, if a plugin can be zero latency, but your particular version is adding PDC, you might want to look at another plug. Shameless plug for our company, AIX DSP. We do everything zero latency that we can, and we give you an option to do look-ahead and stuff if you're like in a mixed situation, fine. So let's see. So the guy answered back. He said, okay, I know what some of these words mean. The plugins I was using were about 6 neural DSPs and 2 Spitfires and some stock Reaper stuff like Reverb. So is your main advice just use different plugins? Would any of this be fixed by getting a faster computer? Thanks you for looking at this. I really appreciate it. Thank you. We really appreciate it when you appreciate it. So one of the cues there, I know people say neural DSP munches a lot. I didn't really find that, but I could see that maybe 6 of them would. Now, when he says reverb, and we're talking REA verb, the Reaper's convolution reverb, there's a number of reasons why this thing could not just be munchy. I mean, it could be latent and munchy. So somebody else says, the problem could be your interface. I had a Focusrite Scarlett Solo 2nd Gen, and I was constantly having issues with dropouts, clicks, ripping sounds, etc. I used Reaper on a crazy powerful Dell gaming machine from 2015. Plenty powerful enough for what I was doing, so all these issues didn't make sense. It was optimized according to Sweetwater. And then what do you got? You got a Steinberg UR22C, and everything works great. Sounds better too. That's the Yamaha Steinberg driver. Could be true. You should be able to get the Focusrite drivers to work. And really, Focusrite, they've been very responsive. So let me know. If you really have trouble with Focusrite, let me know, and I'll see if I can talk to them. But I answered that Reverb, remember, Reaper's onboard convolution reverb, has 2 checkboxes for low latency or zero latency mode. Though, unless it's on the master, the latency from a reverb shouldn't matter much. And when I say that is, let's say you have a reverb running in parallel and it's got a lot of latency. You don't need to, you can just let it, you don't need to compensate for that. I mean, it'd be nice to, but for the most part, especially while you're tracking, you don't need to compensate for that. Whatever that round trip latency is to get to that reverb and back is just call that your pre-delay for your reverb. I mean, it's not, once you start singing, it'll be fine, But so that's why I say it shouldn't matter for much if it's on a parallel bus. But you can put reverb in a zero latency mode, and then you don't have to worry about that at all. It's not going to add that. But of course, I said, remember, I said, what's on the master bus? That one's really long. That was the one that was the master bus was 119 milliseconds long, right? And I said, faster computers can't help PDC at all. Okay, they can't, right? Only time traveling could. So, like, if your PDC is because you got to look ahead, you'd have to look ahead in time in order to do that. So, unless some weird quantum tunneling or something, I don't know. Yeah. Faster computer can't help PDC. So that's why I say I try to use all zero latency plugins so I can have the same sort of setup during mixing as tracking. But even then, some of them can turn on a look ahead mode, which would add latency. But during mixing, when it doesn't matter so much. And I think so then he's asking, when I said that faster computers can't help PDC at all, he says, okay, so you're saying if I open this project on a computer with the better CPU, more RAM, etc., with the same interface and the same plugins, it will have the same PDC as it does now? Yes, it will have the same PDC as it does now. However, maybe some of these plugins have a low latency mode or zero latency mode that eats a lot more CPU. Then maybe that would technically you could lower the PDC by not having a PDC on that case. Okay, and then he says, and the only way to reduce it is to switch plugins. Probably, except for, again, if it has a zero latency or low latency mode. He says, on the master bus, I have 3 T-Rax plugins, a limiter, a compressor, and a tape saturator. Aren't all the IK multimedia ones latent? Remember there had like a 7 samples latency for like amplitude or whatever, but there was a really good reason for it. But I thought some of the T-Rax were like super latent, weren't they? Limiter, a compressor, and a tape saturator. It could be. They could be really latent. He says, I have been told by others that these are relatively light compared to comparable versions from Waves or UAD or whatever, but I guess that was wrong. No, not necessarily. Actually, they are pretty light. I was surprised by how little amplitude uses, actually. It's pretty incredible. Other than that, the other tracks had 6 neurals, 2 Spitfires, and 2 reverbs. The things that I've noticed actually causing me latency while recording are things like having 2 or more plugins on the track, which will give me scratching, distorted, or laggy sounds. But I also have projects that are MIDI only, that once they get past about 12 plugins in total, will start with the lagging, scratching, and crashing. Again, you know, like the faster computer can definitely let you run more plugins. That's for sure. So the master bus is the 3 T-Rax, and that's it. But they could be super latent. Yeah, they really could be. I know people say the neural DSP were munchy, but I remember testing them and they weren't really that bad. Yeah, we'll talk about this, but let's get your reverbs into 0 latency. Yeah, I'm sorry about the T-Rax thing. Let me look into maybe IK has like a lower latency but that shouldn't matter. Like, wait, are you trying to? Okay, so we got to establish and really, is he recording with that master bus set up that way? Because then it doesn't matter what computer you buy. If you're using a latent plugin to the master bus, it's always going to suck for recording. You can't have those on there. Let me get some more information on that, but I promise I will try as hard as I can this week to actually test out those XR 18 drivers. I know everybody's asking about that, but I am going to go lay down because I had a long day yesterday and last night, and I'll see you guys next week.